It's time. I am delivering my 2022 statistical projections for the Buffalo Bills offense today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Monday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, or if you are joining us on the YouTube channel, your first watch every day. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. I've been excited to deliver this information to you. It's my 2022 Buffalo Bills offensive statistical projections. I've done this over the last couple of years on the podcast, and I've done pretty good with my projections. And so I'm excited to share with you where I see everything unfolding in 2022. Now, a couple of things to just say right off the bat. First of all, this does assume a level of health for the football team. You know, I'm not projecting anybody to get really injured. I take a lot of data and I take it down to a per game average and then send it out across 17 to get to a lot of my numbers. So you do have to keep in mind that an injury obviously throws a lot of this off. And then number two, look, I'm not going to get all of this right. I won't. I think I'll come close on a lot of it like I have in the past. But this is about me taking my thoughts about the Bills offense and how I think all of these pieces are going to fit together. And then this is the numerical, the way that you can show that through numbers, right? How I think the tight ends and running backs are going to be involved, how often I think the Bills will throw the football to and to whom, right? All of that stuff is really just embodied within this. And so all the conversations that we've had about previewing this football team for 2022, it's really encapsulated in this discussion. So when I've sat here and told you for the last several months that I think the Bills tight ends can claim 20% of the market share for this offense, well, guess what? I am projecting them to have 20% market share of this offense, right? It's going to be shown in this model that I'm going to disclose to you today. And every number here is rooted in sound process. I have notes on every single number that I got to, and just it's all defendable. And that's something that's important to me as you go through something like this. Hey, you're not going to get it all right, but was your process good and is it defendable? And I feel very, very comfortable that that is true for what I'm about to deliver. All right, so let's get into it. First thing you got to do when you're going to figure out or project stats for a team is how many plays per game are they going to run? How many plays per game are the Buffalo Bills going to run on offense in 2022? Well, obviously, I'm going to look back at the last two seasons as a strong foundation for us to come up with a good benchmark to how to forecast things in 2022. So in 2020, the Bills ran 63 plays per game. In 2021, they ran 66 plays per game. I think this year they'll come in at 65 plays per game. And then from there, now that you have the number of plays that you expect the team to run, 65 per game, then it's about figuring out what percentage of those plays are passes, what percentage of those plays are runs. In 2020 and 2021, the Bills were both years 59% pass, 41% run. I think that the numbers will be fairly close this year. I do think the Bills want to run the football a little bit more. So I'm accounting for a bit of an uptick in run percentage, just 2%. So I have 43% run, 57% pass for the Bills in 2022. So with that out of the way, we can now get very specific with the players. And we will start this conversation with Josh Allen. So we'll do Josh Allen, then all the receivers, then the running backs in terms of rushing production, then Tyler Bass, and then just kind of an overall snapshot of where I think the Bills will settle in terms of scoring. So for Josh Allen, we've already figured out that I think the Bills will pass the ball 57% of the time. And so that puts him at 37 passing attempts per game. And in 2020, he had 36 passing attempts per game. In 2021, he had 38 passes per game. I have him right in the middle at 37. I do think that the Bills will want to run the ball more this year, but some of that desire will be offset by a more competitive slate of offenses, so the Bills will still throw the football quite a bit. So 37 passing attempts per game, which is important because that means 629 passing attempts for the season. And so when I go to my receiving stats, I have 629 targets to distribute. So 37 passing attempts per game. What do I think the completion percentage will be? Now, obviously, I look at the last two seasons as a good starting point to come to my number. In 2020, Josh Allen completed 69% of his passes. In 2021, it went down to 63%. That's pretty low based on where he was 69% in 2020. 63% in 2021 was 24th in the NFL. I think that will come up a bit in 2022. And the reason I think it will come up a bit is because I think the Bills will have better luck when it comes to weather. I mean, just think about the rain games, the Houston game. You had the Chiefs game on the road. You had the Hurricane game against the Patriots in Buffalo. The Falcons, it was snowing. Carolina was frigid. So I think the Bills will have a little bit better luck when it comes to weather. I also think that the Bills stylistically will check the football down a little bit more, and that will lead to more efficiency in the passing game. So I am projecting 66% completion percentage for Josh Allen in 2022. And if he completes 66%, last year that was 15th in the NFL. So it's not even like I'm projecting Josh Allen to be a top 10 player in terms of completion percentage. Can he be? Yeah, I think he certainly can. But I have him at 66%. So with us now identifying the amount of passing attempts at 37 per game and the completion percentage of 66%, that allows us to have 420 completions. So I think Josh Allen will attempt 629 passes and complete 420 of them. From there, you got to identify what you think the yards per attempt will be. In 2020, Josh Allen had 7.94 yards per attempt. Last year, this went down quite a bit, 6.82, and that was 23rd in the NFL. So I think this is a number for Josh that I think will come up a bit in 2022. I have him at 7.5 yards per attempt, which based on last year's numbers across the NFL, that would have him around 10th. So 629 passing attempts with 7.5 yards per attempt. That gets us to 4,720 passing yards. And so in 2020, he had 4,544 passing yards. In 2021, he had 4,407. I'm projecting him at 4,720. So that would be a career high in passing yards for Josh Allen in 2022. Also, that 4,720 passing yards would put him at 6th in the NFL last season. So again, I'm not even projecting him to be top 5 in passing yards, which is something that you'll notice here is I'm not really going to forecast the greatest season of Josh Allen's career. I'm never going to do something like that, but I'm going to kind of have him between 2020 and 2021. So let's talk about passing touchdowns. And I think the way that you get to passing touchdowns is you have to think of them as a percentage of throws. So in 2020, Josh Allen had 37 touchdowns passing, which was 6.5% of his throws. 2021, 36 touchdowns passing, 5.6% of his throws. That was 10th in the NFL in terms of touchdowns as a percentage of throws. So in 2022, I think Josh Allen will kind of be in the middle of those numbers, 6% touchdown percentage, which would give him 38 passing touchdowns. That would be 6th most in the NFL last season. So 38 passing touchdowns for Josh Allen in 2022. Same type of process to do interceptions. I look at them as a percentage of throws, not volume. Everybody talks about Josh Allen passing or having 15 interceptions. Like, okay, that's fine, but he also passed the football 646 times. So what is it as a percentage of throws? Well, last year it was 2.3%. The year before, 2020, was 1.7%. I have Josh Allen's interception percentage at 1.9% for 2022, which would result in 12 interceptions on the season. And now that we have our passing attempts, our completions, our touchdowns, and interceptions, that gets us our passer rating. And Josh Allen's passer rating in 2020 was 107.2. In 2021, it was 92.2. In 2022, I'm projecting 100.65 in terms of passer rating, which would have placed him 9th in the NFL last season. So Josh Allen's 2022 projection from me, 629 attempts, 420 completions, which is a completion percentage of 66%, 4,720 yards, 7.5 yards per attempt, 38 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, and a passer rating of 100.65. So I just went through and gave you my Josh Allen projections, and what's really cool about that is you can go to betonline.net right now, and you can bet on the over-unders for Josh Allen and his statistical projection. You could do all those types of bets. Football futures bets are happening right now at betonline.net. So if you have a hunch as to who's going to win a particular division or any of those types of props, they're all available to you. They've also got Major League Baseball. They've got boxing, golf, anything you want to wager on when it comes to sports, they have it. They even have Vegas casino games. There's live betting, esports. They've got it all over at betonline.net. Super easy to use website that you can check out on your desktop or your mobile device. So head on over today and get in on the trends and the action. It's BetOnline, and it's where the game starts. So with Josh Allen's passing numbers out of the way, we can get to the rest of the offense. And that's really the foundation in my mind. And if you're going to do a statistical projection on the Bills offense, you start with Josh Allen and you go from there. And now that we have his raw data, we can now take the 420 completions, the 629 targets, the 4,720 yards, the 38 touchdown, and distribute them to the Bills receivers. And so I'll go through the receivers, then the tight ends, and then the running backs. So for Stefon Diggs, we'll start there, obviously. I'm projecting 160 targets at 166 in 2020, 164 in 2021. I have him at 160 for this coming season. From there, I go to reception percentage. What percentage of the targets will be a reception, right? And you have to look at their norms. And so in 2020, Stefon Diggs was 76.5%. 2021, it was 62.8%. I think that comes up in 2022. So I think Stefon Diggs will catch 68.9% of his, 68.12% of his targets, which is right in line with his career average of 68.9. And so if he catches 68.12% of his targets, that gets us to 109 receptions. So 109 receptions on 160 targets for Stefon Diggs. I have him at 12 yards per reception, which is what he's averaged throughout his time in Buffalo. I think that'll be very similar. And that gets us to 1,311 yards. So 160 targets for Diggs, 109 receptions, 1,311 yards. That's 12 yards per reception, and I am projecting 10 touchdowns. He had 10 touchdowns receiving last year. He had, I think, 9 the year before. I think that's a pretty safe number for him. Now let's get to Gabriel Davis. Obviously, a player that is going to have a bit of a uptick in market share of this offense. And with that in mind, and him having two very statistically similar seasons his first 2 years in the NFL, and now projecting him to have a big uptick in targets, this presents a challenging player to forecast, but I'll give it my best. So 63 targets last year. I think that goes up to 110 in 2022, which is somewhere around the amount of targets that we've seen Cole Beasley get in this offense. Not that I think they're going to be used similarly at all, but I think as a number 2 receiver, that's a pretty safe number for us to get to. So from 63 targets to 110. Now, from there, you got to do the reception percentage. And basically in 2020 and 2021, Gabe was around 56%. I think that will come up because you consider Gabe as kind of a down the field target. Those are lower percentage opportunities where I think there's going to be more of a volume component to Gabe, and he'll have more quick game targets and not as many deep. And so I think he'll go from 56% reception percentage to 60%. And if he catches 60% of his targets that I project, that gets us to 66 receptions. So 66 catches for Gabriel Davis on 110 targets. Now we have to do yards per reception. So the previous 2 seasons in Buffalo, Gabe averaged 16.4 yards per catch. Now, like I said about the reception percentage, there's going to be more volume, and I think less deep throws, not a ton less deep throws, but less deep throws, which will lead to less yards per catch. And still a good number here. I'm projecting 14.4 yards per catch, but that is down 2 yards from the last 2 seasons, which makes a lot of sense to me just based on how I envision his role and where the targets are going to come based on the higher market share, right? More volume of targets. So at 14.4 yards per catch, that gets us to 950 yards. And then 9 touchdowns. I think Gabe's going to be a productive touchdown scorer. They like to get him going on the RPOs in the red zone. And so I think he'll get a healthy amount of touchdowns, 9 touchdowns for Gabe Davis. So 63 catches on 110 targets, 950 yards, 14.4 yards per catch, and 9 touchdowns for Gabriel Davis in 2022. Let's get to Jamison Crowder. Now, I think Jamison Crowder is going to be a productive player, but some of that slot production that we've seen from Cole Beasley over the last several seasons, I think goes to tight ends and running backs. And so I'm not going to sit here and project, Jamison Crowder to claim the same 110 or so targets that Cole Beasley's been getting. And so I am going to project him to have 80 targets. And Cole Beasley had 112 last year. I think taking Jamison down to 80, but then kind of pushing some of that to the tight ends and running backs makes sense in my head. Reception percentage, I have him at 63%. It's a little bit low for his career average, but I think year one with a new quarterback and a new offense, that could lead to some acclimation when it comes to converting targets into receptions. We saw that last year with Emmanuel Sanders. I think that will happen a little bit for Jamison Crowder. So 63% reception percentage, which is a touch low based on where he's been throughout his career. That gets us to 50 catches. I have him averaging 11 yards per catch, which is right at his career average, which gets us to 550 yards. I have him having 3 touchdown catches. Cole Beasley had 1 last year. He had 4 in 2020, 6 in 2019. I think 3 is a safe number there. So for Jamison Crowder, 80 targets, 50 catches, 550 yards, 3 receiving touchdowns. Isaiah McKenzie. I'm projecting 42 targets, which is a new career high for Isaiah McKenzie. 42 targets. I think he'll catch 71% of those targets. And McKenzie's kind of been a high variance player when it comes to reception percentage. In 2019, 69.2%. 2020, 88.2%. Last season, 77%. And so I think a little bit more traditional usage will be here. He's not going to catch the shuffle passes and maybe some of those dump and run type plays. I think he'll have a little bit more of a traditional usage, which will bring the reception percentage down to more of a normal rate that we would expect for a wide receiver, but still inflated a touch because I think he'll get some of those gadgety plays, but maybe not to the degree he's gotten in the past. So that gets us to 30 catches. I think he'll average 9 yards per catch. He's averaged 9.3 for his career. That gets us to 270 yards. and 2 touchdowns. So for Isaiah McKenzie, 42 targets, 30 catches, 270 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's literally the best season of Isaiah McKenzie's career. Dawson Knox. So we got the main receivers out of the way. Let's move to Dawson Knox and O.J. Howard. So for Dawson Knox, I'm projecting 85 targets, which is 5 targets per game. He averaged 5.07 targets per game last year. I think he'll catch 71% of those targets. He caught 69% of the targets in 2021. I'm projecting even a little bit more growth, right, of Dawson Knox not maybe having to deal with a broken hand and those types of things. I think that he'll be even more efficient with his opportunities in 2022. So that gets us to 60 catches. I'm going to project an average of 12 yards per reception. His career average is 12.5. That gets us to 720 yards and 9 touchdowns. So Dawson Knox, 85 targets, 60 catches, 720 yards, and 9 touchdowns. If that seems like a big season to you, it's literally just 3 more yards per game than he had last year. And I think the 9 touchdowns, certainly he's a player that the Bills have done well to give opportunities in the red zone. He's good after the catch. I think he'll get, he'll push for that 10 touchdown number again. O.J. Howard. I said that I think the Bills will commit 20% of their targets in the passing game to tight ends. And so if I have 85 out of 629 going to Dawson Knox, that means I have to give 40 to O.J. Howard to get to that 20%. So I have 125 targets going to tight ends, Dawson Knox and O.J. Howard in this offense. So 40 targets. I have a reception percentage of 65%. His career average is 66.1%. So I think that's a pretty safe number. That gets us to 26 catches on 40 targets. I do have him at 11.7 yards per catch. His career average is 14.6. I think that'll come down a little bit in Buffalo. Some of the opportunities he had earlier in his career were very much down the field, and I think he'll have some of that, but not enough for me to think he'll stick around that 15 average. I think 11.7 is a little more safe. And if that's the case, that gets us to 305 yards. I'm going to project 2 touchdown receptions for O.J. Howard. So for O.J. Howard, 40 targets, 26 catches, 11.7 yards per catch, 305 yards receiving, 2 receiving touchdowns. All right, so the tight ends are out of the way. That gets us to the running backs and a player that I'm sure many people are interested in, James Cook. Now, he's really hard to project because we've never seen the Bills prioritize a receiving back like this. When you think about the J.D. McKissick attempted signing, James Cook in the second round, they want this type of player. Now, how do they incorporate him? That's a mystery, right? So I just kind of have to guess here. Now, it's going to be rooted in historical data. So what I did is I went over the last 5 seasons, and I took the rookie running backs, the top 2 rookie running backs, to just see how many catches and yards they had. And so let me give you that data before I give you what I'm projecting for James Cook. So in 2021, Najee Harris, 74 catches, 467 yards. 2021, Javonte Williams, 43 catches, 316 yards. Those were your top 2 most productive rookie receiving backs. In 2020, James Robinson, 49 catches, 344 yards. DeAndre Swift, 46 catches, 357 yards. Going to 2019, Miles Sanders, 50 catches, 509 yards. Number 2 receiver as a running back in 2019 was Devin Singletary, 29 catches, 194 yards. 2018, Saquon Barkley had 91 catches for 721 yards. Number 2 pick in that draft, Nyheim Hines, 63 catches, 425 yards. And then one more year, 2017, this gets us Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey. Alvin Kamara, 81 catches, 826 yards. Christian McCaffrey, 80 catches, 651 yards. So hopefully that gives you some level of understanding of what rookie running backs do as receivers in their first season. And so the 2 players that I was kind of gravitated towards when I was going to project James Cook was Miles Sanders and Nyheim Hines, kind of a blend of what they did as rookies. So I think James Cook can claim 65 targets. I think he'll catch 77% of those targets. I wanted him around 80%, but I dropped it just a touch because he is a rookie, so there's going to be some variance. That gets us to 50 catches. I have him averaging 8.18 yards per catch, which is a kind of normal amount for a running back. That gets to 409 yards and 2 touchdowns. For James Cook, 50 catches on 65 targets, 409 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. Now, Devin Singletary is a player that his receiving production is going to come down. Obviously with, I think, more of an emphasis on tight ends and James Cook being in the mix. I have Devin Singletary's receptions and opportunities to catch a football coming down a bit here in this offense. So I think he'll have 27 targets, and he had 50 last year, 50 the year before, 41 in 2019. So down to 27 targets. I have him at a 70% reception percentage. His career average is 75.9%, so a little bit of a dip here. But I do think that a lack of consistent utilization in the passing game will lead to a little bit more inefficiency from Devin Singletary. And so that gets us to 19 catches. Have him at 6.5 yards per catch, which is right at his career average, which means 125 receiving yards. I'm not projecting a receiving touchdown for Devin Singletary. He had 1 receiving touchdown over the last 2 seasons. So I don't think this is going to be a great situation for him to catch touchdown passes. So for Devin Singletary, 27 targets, 19 catches, 6.5 yards per catch, 125 yards, and 0 receiving touchdowns. Now, I do have an other bucket. This is where I'll kind of dump the Jake Kumaro production, the Khalil Shakir, Zach Moss, or just random targets, right? The Bills might throw a pass to an offensive lineman. This is the other category. And the remainder is 20 targets, 10 catches, 80 yards, and 1 touchdown. So there you have it. That's how I am distributing the passing production that I came up with for Josh Allen amongst his weapons. If you're living paycheck to paycheck or struggling to make ends meet, it can be really stressful when unexpected expenses come up. Now, Dave can help you get out of a pinch when you really need it. Dave is the banking app that can get you up to $500 instantly with extra cash. That's more money to fill your tank, buy a wedding gift, or catch up on bills. You can finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out without any hang-ups. There's no interest and no credit check needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch and you need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's DAVE. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. Future you will thank you. All right, so let's talk about rushing production for the Bills offense. And again, we've kind of already established how many plays per game I think the Bills will run, which is 65. We have 37 of them being passes, and then you kind of have to factor in like a sack or 2 per game, and that gets us to 27 actual rushing attempts per game. And so 27 rushing attempts per game, that gets us to 459 rushing attempts on the season. The Bills ran it 461 times last year, 411 times in 2020. So I think 459 is a pretty safe number. So what am I going to do with these 459 targets, or 459 carries, excuse me? Well, we're going to start by giving 190 of them to Devin Singletary. He had 188 carries last year. I still think that Devin Singletary will be the primary ball carrier for this offense. And so putting him at 190 carries, again, 188 last year, when you think about that 188 carries for Devin Singletary in 2021, a lot of that came late in the season when he was the focal point. He was the primary back. But, you know, he was kind of in tandem throughout the season, even at times early on after he was fumbling a bit, was kind of the second option. And so I think that kind of balances out, and he'll get 190 carries. I think he'll have 4.63 yards per carry, had 4.6 last year, 4.7 for his career. So just kind of staying on par with what his normal average per carry has been. And that gets us to 880 rushing yards for Devin Singletary. 7 rushing touchdowns, which is the same that he had last year. So for Devin Singletary, 190 rushes, 880 yards, 7 rushing touchdowns. James Cook, rushing stats. I'm going with 120 rushes for James Cook. Zach Moss, last year in the 13 games that he was active, he had about 7 rushes per game. And so I'm basically taking about that 7 rushes per game that Zach Moss got, and I'm giving it to James Cook across 17 games. And so remember, I have 459 rushing attempts to deal with. I gave 190 to Devin Singletary. I have to factor in a good chunk of them for Josh Allen, and then I'm kind of thinking about the remainder as their logical amount for James Cook, and that's 120 in my opinion. Yards per carry, this is kind of tough to project. I have him at 4.2. 2 numbers that I looked at that I thought would be helpful in me assigning this number. Dalvin Cook, his brother, had 4.8 as a rookie. Nyheim Hines with the Colts had 3.7. I think somewhere in the middle of that makes sense to me. So if he has 120 carries and 505 rushing yards, and 4.2 yards per carry, that gets us to 505 rushing yards. So that's what I'm projecting for James Cook. I think 2 rushing touchdowns is a pretty safe amount. I don't think he'll gain a lot of short yardage carries, but he might break some longer runs that turn into touchdowns. So 505 rushing yards on 120 carries, 2 rushing touchdowns for James Cook as a rookie. Which is a pretty good rookie season. I mean, I know it's not the 1,500 yards that NFL.com projected, but 505 rushing yards. What I have, Matt, 409 receiving yards, 900 yards from scrimmage, a little more, and 6 touchdowns. I mean, that's a really good year as a complimentary running back as a rookie. All right, now for Josh Allen's rushing production. I have him at 105 carries, which is 6.2 per game. And when you look at his per game carries over his career, in 2018, 7.4, 2019, 6.8, 2020, 6.4, 2021, 7.2. I think 6.2 is a pretty safe number for me. It is the least amount of his career, but it's not like I'm projecting a ton less than usual. I think Josh Allen running the football is still going to be a thing. So 105 carries on the season. I think he'll have 6.7 yards per carry. His career average is 6.9. So right at about his career average. 7 rushing touchdowns. That's a number that feels right to me. His rushing touchdown total per season has been 8, 9, 8, and 6. 7 seems like a logical number. So I have the Bills running the football 459 times, 2,240 yards, 4.8 yards per carry, 19 rushing touchdowns. And that's very, very close to what they had in 2021. So let's just actually give you those numbers side by side. Attempts 2021, 461. I'm projecting 459. Yards in 2021 were 2,209. I have them at 2,240. 4.8 yards per carry both seasons. 20 rushing touchdowns in 2021. I'm projecting 19 rushing touchdowns for the Bills in 2022. Let's get to Tyler Bass. I think he'll go 29 of 33 on field goals. The last 2 seasons, as a rookie, he was 28 of 34. In 2021, he was 28 of 32. I have him at 29 of 33. It's right on par with kind of his arc as a player. That is him making 87.8% of his field goals, and he made 87.5% in 2021. I think the Bills will score 59 touchdowns, which, I projected, 38 passing touchdowns, 19 rushing touchdowns. Also, that means 2 miscellaneous touchdowns. And the reason I'm getting to this right now is because I have to project how many extra points Tyler Bass will attempt. And so 59 total touchdowns. I think the Bills will go for 2-3 times, which is basically what they had last year. Of the 56 extra points that I have Tyler Bass attempting, I think he'll make 54 of them. He hit all 51 last year. That's that's not normal based on the new extra points and how it's a 33-yard attempt instead of 19. So I have him going 54 of 56 for 141 total points. So I'd have him making 29 of 33 field goals, 54 of 56 extra points for 141 total points scored for Tyler Bass. So how does this all break down for the Bills scoring? 57 offensive touchdowns, 2 miscellaneous touchdowns, whether that's defense or special teams, 29 field goals, 54 extra points. That gets us to 495 total points, 29.1 points per game. Last year, the Bills scored 28.4 points per game. That was third in the NFL. 29.1 would put them at third again if everyone scored the same as last year. So that's how I see it unfolding. I guess a fairly similar result in some ways, but I think the distribution is definitely different. I have a bigger chunk of the market share in the passing game going to tight ends. I have a little bit more going to running backs. I have obviously Gabriel Davis claiming a lot more. It's just it's a different distribution of the numbers with Josh Allen kind of coming in somewhere between 2020 and 2021. I think this is very logical in my mind. I think it's all defendable. I can back up every single number that I gave you with the reason why. And I think that reason is rooted in good process. So I know that listening to a bunch of numbers and projections isn't always the best podcast, but I hope that the subject matter being me forecasting the Bills' stats in 2022 made this interesting for you. This isn't a normal type of conversation that we would have. It's a lot more analysis driven, but this is really, like I said at the beginning, this is all the analysis that I've been giving you over the last several months, I guess manifested in these projections. And what's cool is we have these in place. And so I can go through this and, as we learn more information throughout training camp and preseason, maybe there's an injury, maybe there's a player that is climbing the depth chart and we kind of have to rework some stuff. This is a good baseline for us entering camp, which is pretty soon here. And then, maybe we can do an update at some point before the season as we continue to gain information on the 2022 Buffalo Bills. Well, this was fun to put together. I hope you enjoyed listening. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Herd Mentality tomorrow. Don't miss it. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.